Thank you. My name is Joan Ford. I am the president of the League of Women Voters of Arlington, and I want to thank you all for coming to the 8th Congressional District Candidate Forum. I am most ably assisted this evening by two seniors from Hayfield Secondary High. This is Maggie Martin. Where's Maggie? Here's Maggie. And Annalise Grunder. So they are going to be switching off asking questions to both candidates with me this evening. It is now my pleasure to introduce our candidates, and they are seated in the position in which they appear on the ballot. So we have Mr. Thomas O. And Congressman Don Beyer.
Details, post colors. Forward, march. Left. Left. Ready, two. Please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we are going to start with the 3-minute opening. Mr. O, you're up first.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. I know it's very busy tonight, 7 p.m., and DC traffic can sometimes be horrible depending on where you're coming from. So I really appreciate everyone being here. My name's Thomas O. I'm a Republican nominee running in the 8th Congressional District against Mr. Beyer. I'm born and raised here in Northern Virginia. I'm 100% Northern Virginia product. I went to Centerville High School, and I was enlisted into the military straight out of high school. And eventually went to George Mason University, where I earned my commission as an Army officer. So if I sound uneducated, you can talk to the Fairfax County Public Schools on that, or George Mason University. But in all, I'm proud to be a Northern Virginian. After I leave the military last year, I just recently decided to run for Congress based on basic leadership philosophies I learned in the military. I learned in the military you should always work for your subordinates don't work for you. And I want to continue my service to make our community better and have better representation and to better serve you. I always promise to be honest, and I will always try to give you the most honest feedback possible. We have kind of a tension, or not tension, but an idea that politicians are sometimes at least disrespect professions for a reason. And rather than accepting as a norm, Don Beyer's a great gentleman. He's very candid. He's very nice. I'm not attacking Beyer on this, but I want to set a positive example for what's going on right now in politics. We're so polarized, and I think John McCain said it very well, is we need to do what's best for the American people at the end of the day. And that's what I look at. I look at what's best for our district, and there are things I agree with Mr. Beyer, and there are a lot of things I disagree with Mr. Beyer. I want to better serve you, and that's why I decided to run. My biggest goal is the $21 trillion in debt. I want to actually have long-term solutions rather than short-term solutions that gets politicians elected every single year. And this debt is a huge issue, and I'm worried about the future of this country. I spent 8 years in the military defending the Constitution, and that's how I basically look at things when I make a decision. I look at this, make decisions objectively. I don't put emotions into it. I look at what's best overall, and the Constitution comes first. I believe there's also a huge lack in checks and balances. There's checks and balances for a reason. And we're so tribal right now as political parties that we will only support Republicans or Democrats. And all in all, the job of a congressman is just to be a congressman, not to influence who get nominated for the Supreme Court, but also to pass laws and have a common sense budget. If you would like to learn more about my platform, please visit my website. It's www.letschangecongress.org. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter at O4Congress. Thank you so much, and I'm looking for your support on November 6th.
Good evening. Thank you all very much for being here tonight. Thanks to the League of Women Voters and the many different organizations who've come to put this together. And I really thank you for being an active part of this democracy. I think we have 410,000 registered voters in the 8th District, and you were the brave ones who showed up tonight. I'd also like to thank my friend and my opponent, Thomas. So this is, I think, the 7th time we've done something together. Both of us trying to show as much respect for our voters as possible. I've been honored to serve as your congressman for the last 4 years. I believe the most important quality that you need to demand in your political leaders is to have a servant's heart. And I hope that I show this every day, that this is the servant leader that I want to be. And I very much hope that Democrats earn the majority in the U.S. House on November 6th. With Congress, I agree, or with Thomas, I agree that we need to change Congress. And here are the immediate priorities of Democrats in the next Congress. We'll act immediately to rein in the cost of health care premiums and fight to get a real handle on the cost of prescription drugs. We will protect dreamers from deportation. I believe George Mason University and Northern Virginia Community College have perhaps the most dreamer students of any in the country. We'll pass common sense gun legislation, beginning with universal background checks. We'll fund a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, which will put many of America's blue-collar workers back to work and increase wages for the bottom half of America. And we'll pass new ethics legislation to reduce the role of money in Washington. My personal priorities are to be the lead in Congress on a carbon fee and economic dividend. The most powerful thing we can do to fight climate change, which we now continue to discover is more dangerous than ever. I'll fight for a 10-year commitment to at least a 4% increase per year for federal funding and basic research. This is the best way, most robust way to grow our economy. I will continue to lead the effort on suicide prevention. We lose 45,000 Americans every year to this early tragic death. I'll do all I can to pass my No Hate Act, which will dramatically improve the reporting of hate crimes by police. And I will be the lead co-sponsor on paid maternity leave for federal employees. Hopefully, the first step towards paid maternity leave across the country, and much, much more. I work as hard as I can every day, surrounded by some really wonderful people, to leave the world a different, better place. And that's the task for all of us, especially in this divided country, to lead, to heal, to inspire, to lift people up. And I want to thank you for this amazing opportunity you've given me to do exactly.
The first question to Mr. Beyer. How will you address the concern of spiraling student debt?
Thank you for the difficult question. There are a lot of really different ways to go about this. I was ambassador to Switzerland for 4 years in Obama 1, and one of the most amazing parts about that country was that the cost of college was $1,000 per year. And as a consequence, no one left university with any student debt. To fix it, we're going to have to do many different things, but we start with free community college. There are a number of states that have committed to that already. Tennessee has done it. Virginia's on the path to do it, so that you can eliminate at least half of the challenge. A second big piece is giving students the ability to refinance student debt. Right now, if you're locked in at 6, 7, 8, 9%, you're locked in for the term of the loan, rather than being able to get out, get yourself a good job, and be able to renegotiate it at a 4%, 3% rate as you want to do. And I think the bigger picture is trying to rethink exactly the way we fund higher education. If you look at inflation curves, the cost of student education, higher education, has gone up much, much, much faster than the regular inflation rate for almost everything else in our economy. And there are a lot of different pieces of this, but among them is with 15 seconds to go, the way so many colleges are competing for students by having ever more sophisticated facilities. And if it's just a library, it's great. If it's a swimming pool, it's maybe not so great. And it's going to cause a lot of more restraint in terms of how we make it.
In regards to student debt, I think the first thing we need to do is actually incentivize citizens to actually, all Americans essentially, to take on programs and professions that we're lacking in the career industry. For example, everyone says we have a shortage of doctors, and when you're trying to get a doctor's appointment, it takes 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and obviously med school is very expensive. So why don't we have a, very similar to the military, if you join the military, your college is paid for. But if you want to be a public servant and be a doctor for the VA or other nonprofit or humanitarian aids that helps the public sector, and if you're providing a service, then why don't we have the government pay for it? Now, free college sounds very nice and very good, but in reality, how are we going to pay for it? I like a lot of free stuff. We all do. You know, I like to have a free car, a free house, but the cost is the issue. And I mean, if we can pay for it, I'd love it. But in reality, it is not sustainable. And also in regards to what can we do? How about if students are discriminated on which college they go to? For example, if you're Asian, you obviously need a higher SAT score or GPA. Why don't we penalize the colleges and make them pay off student loans for students that were discriminated? That's a positive step, and that's a step towards equality in the future for all students. Thank you.
What should the U.S. response be to the disappearance and suspected killing of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi?
I think we definitely need an investigation on that, and I honestly don't think that we can just trust one agency to do an investigation. I'm a criminology major, and when you have one investigation or one national police force, it can also lead to corruption and suspicion. And I know there are very good, hardworking, honest FBI agents, but you know, with the media, people are always going to have their suspicions. So I think we need to have an investigation at the local level, at the state level, and also independently at the federal level. And they need to do their own investigation and work with local medias. And I'm also a big fan of community policing. I think the fact that there's such a horrible incident happened is a tragic, and it can't just go on being forgotten. And I think that's also an issue right now with the media is the media only talk about these things that sell stories, but they don't really highlight the real important issues that goes on. Like talking about Kanye is not very important. I think issues like this is a very serious issue that needs to be addressed for the American public.
Quickly, Thomas mentioned the burden of the cost of free community college. We've discovered that states as diverse as New York and Tennessee have figured out how to put that into the state budget because it saves you so much more money to have productive workers. On the issue of Mr. Khashoggi, first of all, the only investigation we're going to get right now is going to be from the Turkish police, but we have the tapes. I think worldwide opinion is united that, and unfortunately you have all the videos now of the Saudi security forces going in. Whether the murder was intentional or not, we have to react very strongly. I think number one, and I'm aboard all these initiatives in Congress, we need to stop our arms sales to Saudi Arabia as a clear message that we do not support this. Second, we need to stop the support of the war in Yemen, which is creating the greatest humanitarian crisis probably since World War II. Number three, we need to ask them or withdraw, recall the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia and throw the Saudi ambassador out. May come back 6 months, a year to come back, but we have to have the strongest possible response that we cannot co-conspire with people who are murdering people who live right here in Northern Virginia, writing for U.S. papers, simply because they're criticizing the Crown Prince.
Mr. Beyer, do you think that enough has been done to safeguard our elections? And if not, what more needs to be done?
That's a complicated question. No, absolutely not. It has not been done. One of the great disappointments I had was that Congress, on a largely partisan vote, refused to fund the extra efforts this year to safeguard our voting machines and our voter files. Interestingly, the greatest impact probably on election interference in 2016, and maybe again in 2018, is going to be through social media rather than through actually influencing the voting machines. Most voting machines in the country are standalone. They're not hooked up to an internet. It's difficult to actually go in and hack it. You can do it one machine at a time, but you have to be there with it. But instead, we found in 2016 that people spreading fake news, sometimes on both sides, can greatly divide the country and provide information. In fact, one of the things that came out was that in Minnesota, in the last 8 weeks in 2016, something like 60% of the news on social media was actually factually incorrect. So we have to, there's so much more that we have to do, but the good news is, though, that the way we are most empowered is to realize that people in other countries, especially the Soviet Russia, have been interfering at the information level, which then wakes us up to look ever deeper into the things that we read, that people aren't, that we have to test again and again to make sure we go to more credible news sources to see what's real.
I believe we can always do more to make things secure. I think we need to be more modernized with what's going on in modern day technology. One thing I actually want to incorporate, to safeguard our IT system is use blockchain. Everyone heard of Bitcoin? Anyone made a lot of money from Bitcoin? Or lose money yet? Well, Bitcoin is basically a simple authentication ledger system, and I think that's a system that we need to adopt and be advanced. Right now, our war is asymmetrical. It's all cyber. You're dealing with elite hackers in China or in North Korea, and we can't be influenced by their meddling, or even Russia, if you want to believe that. But what it comes down to is, honestly, the United States, we've been meddling in elections all the time, and we just take it to a surprise. But how do we counter that? You need to do your research. Look at who you're voting for. Just don't vote blindly when you look for the D or the R. Now, I challenge you right now, as we're talking, go on FEC.gov. Look at where the candidates are getting their money. Or just go to votesmart.org, and you can look at all the key issues, or you can just go to Mr. Beyer's website. If I was an incumbent, I would tell you to go to my website, and you can actually see what people were voting on. Raise your hand right now if you actually look at what people's voting records are. That's not half the room, though, right? So we need to make sure we all do our research and be well-informed as citizens. Thank you.
This is for Mr. O. Do you think the Trans-Pacific Partnership Treaty should be revived or renegotiated?
I'm not too sure as far as the details of that, but my basic trade policy is I believe in a free market economy. I'm really against the idea of tariffs. My philosophy comes to Austrian economics. You want to incentivize your allies to do trade and be competitive. I know there's also an issue too where there's protectionism. For example, when I think Trump talks about raising tariffs on China, is when we try to sell our products, actually China's economy makes it a higher tariff, so our products won't be able to sell. And I think as a world, I think we need, as a global economy, we need to make sure there is protections, again, fair playing field where there's no tariffs at all across all nations. And I think that would make it very easy, and it creates a very fair playing field. There's no cronyism, and there's no bullying. You're not bullying little countries around by having tariffs, and it's also you're able to access more goods, have a free trade where consumers like you are not hurt by the government's taxing products that you might need or materials that you might need to produce for your local businesses.
Yeah, I think Thomas and I largely agree on this. I'm a proud free trade Democrat, and that's just because I sell imported cars. I've been one for a long, long time. And so I was proud to be one of the 28 Democrats that voted to give President Obama trade promotion authority. We did think it was appropriate to be the first president since Franklin Roosevelt not to have trade promotion authority. And once it got that done, the next big challenge before us was TPP. And so I believe I was the first Democrat in the House to come out strongly for the Trans-Pacific Partnership for a lot of reasons, including reasons that I successfully defended for the AFL-CIO here in Virginia. That was going to create the strongest labor provisions for workers in the other 11 countries than we'd ever had, with enforcement provisions, and the strongest environmental protections. We could do things like make labor unions actually legal in Vietnam, where they have not been to date. And I was very disappointed when Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton all withdrew from support for TPP. The good news was the other 11 nations went ahead without us. And things have really moved in the right direction for many of those countries. One of the things Barack Obama said again and again is without TPP and the American leadership, China was going to write the trade rules for the rest of the world. And by the way, the recent apparent Trump success on renegotiating NAFTA with Canada and Mexico has been largely taking the principles of TPP and building them into the old NAFTA agreement.
Mr. Beyer, what changes do you think should be made to improve our healthcare system?
And I get 90 seconds to do that. Number one, first of all, I am a huge fan of the Affordable Care Act, so-called Obamacare, and have fought every attempt by the Republicans, unfortunately, most of them, not all of them, many of them, and the president, to unwind the Obamacare. Taking away the individual mandate was a disaster, because when you only have to insure sick people, the prices are going to go up for everyone else. We took all the young, healthy men out of that equation, unfortunately. I think the waiver of pre-existing conditions is something that hopefully will be the law of the land for the rest of our lives. And treating women equally in terms of premiums at the same age, which was not true before Obamacare, should be what we do for the rest of our lives. But we're really going to have to struggle with bringing down the rate of growth in healthcare costs. That was one of the things the Affordable Care Act was designed to do. Right now, the biggest challenge that we face are the cost of prescription drugs. More than 90% of prescription drugs right now are generics. And generics are where we're seeing, the Martin Shkreli case, the enormous increases, where only one manufacturer will be making a specific generic drug, and therefore they can take it from $50 to $100 to $500 to $800 with no competition. So we're really going to have to find constructive ways to work with the drug companies to significantly bring down these costs. When I was in Switzerland, the only thing that was cheaper was drugs. Well, they were all like $4 or $5 because the government controlled them. We'll go on with another 90 seconds.
First thing we need to do is we need to keep the money out of politics. While the Affordable Care Act started as a good intention, ultimately, is everyone right now satisfied with how their healthcare system is? I see a lot of no's, right? If it did what it intended to do, we wouldn't be talking about this. We would be actually, Democrats would probably be celebrating, oh, the Affordable Care Act works, and Republicans would stay quiet. But there's still an issue. It started as a very positive bill, but when you get money involved, and people throw their money and buy politicians, and there's medical, pharmaceutical PAC money given to politicians, you have $600 EpiPens. And that's why I said, go on FEC.gov, look at who gets money from PACs. This is why I don't take any money from any PACs, and you should see how it really corrupts the system. I also think we need to have more transparency and have a law on healthcare costs. I took my stepmom to the emergency room, and the doctor literally all signed her paperwork. The nurse did all the work, and the doctor charged her $1,500. That makes no sense to me. To me, that's a scam. In reality, how is that possible? And people are going bankrupt, essentially. What kind of country are we to go bankrupt? We need to have more transparency. Also, healthcare is going out of control, too, as far as overhead costs. There's no magic number, but we need to limit what the malpractice insurance is. It's like you're basically driving a car with 10 DUIs, and that's what all these healthcare providers are paying now. And no one should be forced to buy healthcare. You should have multiple options and really choose what health industry you want.
Mr. O, the United Nations recently released a report warning about the dire situation regarding climate change. Do you agree with the report? And if so, what specific actions do you think the U.S. Congress should take to address this issue?
Okay, thank you for bringing that question up. I'm actually very pro-environment. I like the idea of clean energy, renewable energy. I want to take steps, not rapid steps, gradual steps to eventually get there. And I like the idea of everyone likes some chips in here. You like some chips? Well, the bags are actually biodegradable. You could literally litter it, and it's safe for an environment. I think that's pretty neat, and we need to take steps in those directions and recycle. But I do not believe in climate change because mainly we have multiple ice ages over how long we've ever been on this earth or before humans. Now, if I talk about climate change, I'm gonna tell you one thing. I will not take money from Dominion Energy. It's one thing if you want to talk about climate change, but Mr. Beyer has taken, this is one thing I disagree with him on, he has taken over $20,000 from Dominion Energy every election cycle. He's refused to sign the no fossil fuel pledge along many groups, and he's also refused to pledge alongside Activate Virginia that refuses Dominion Energy to buy politicians and wants to advocate for campaign finance reform. And this is actually all Democrat and Green Party organizations. So I was the first Republican to join because we need a clean conscience. Politicians shouldn't be bought, and we need to work together. It's not about being partisan. That's my first step to prove that I'm willing to make bipartisan efforts to work for the American people.
I look for areas of mutual concern with my opponent, but here I couldn't disagree with him more. The greatest existential crisis facing us in this room is climate change. We may worry about our paychecks and worry about gun violence, but the thing that can affect billions of people is the changes that we're doing to our climate right now. Just look at the front page of the Washington Post a week ago Monday. Read the report. You can go on the internet tonight, read the IPCC report. These are the smartest climate scientists in the world, and they say it's much worse than we think. Thomas likes to criticize me for taking Dominion money. We point out that no one would disagree that I am the strongest, clearest voice fighting climate change in the U.S. House. The carbon pricing bill is the bill that I'm carrying. That would be all economists across the political spectrum agree this is the first bravest thing we can do to fight climate change. is make carbon really expensive. So the alternative fuels that we all like will become that much more affordable, that will grow. I'm a car dealer, and I very much oppose Trump's attempt to roll back the CAFE standards that Barack Obama negotiated up to 54 miles per gallon. We're at 36 right now. We need to go much, much farther. Trump unwound the Clean Power Plant bill, which I strongly support. No more coal power plants in the United States. Dominion, by the way, has closed many coal power plants. They are the largest solar and the largest wind in Virginia. We're not going to have a fossil fuel-free future, which Dominion is committed to, unless we work with them.
Mr. Beyer, do you support the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment?
My grandmother was a suffragist in the 19 teens, and when she was a professor at Bryn Mawr in 1916, was almost fired for taking the women down to lobby for the vote and for the Equal Rights Amendment. So in fact, we had our annual women's conference at George Mason University on Saturday morning, and I had 800 women sign up, and half of the morning was just on Virginia being the 38th state to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. We may need 1 or 2 more votes in that Virginia House and the Virginia Senate, but we're working hard to get that. The 38 states gives us the 3/4 to make it part of the U.S. Constitution. There will be a Supreme Court debate about whether the 5-year limit they put on back in the 70s is actually valid or not. But I'm also a lead co-sponsor of current legislation that takes that 5-year cap off. And if Congress can put it on, Congress can take it off. So I am very, very strongly supportive. By the way, I think there's really interesting public comparison polling on it, that if you frame the Equal Rights Amendment as there should be equal rights for men and women, like 98% of Americans support it. You just have to put the men part in there first. But yes, I strongly support it, and I do confidently believe it will be part of the law. By the way, some of the biggest objections to it in the early 80s when Phyllis Schlafly was out there was that women would be serving in the military. I think we've gotten past that part.
I just want to touch base, and I do support the Equal Rights Act. I don't see how anyone wouldn't support that. Dominion Energy, if they're the large solar and wind turbine energy, it's because they're the only energy, and there's a monopoly here. You can put one wind panel, and congratulations, they are the biggest one. And actually, if you look at Dominion Energy, 73% of Dominion's energy's outputs contribute to carbon. So like I said, if you want to attack something, just be true to your word. And that's what I'm trying to do, is be very honest with you. And as far as environmental protections, this is what we're talking about, is if you can't just talk about carbon, I might as well be a gun dealer and talk about banning guns. It doesn't make sense right now. Now, if my good friend Mr. Beyer was selling Teslas, I would probably just not say anything all day. Maybe you should invest in Teslas. That might be the future way to go. As far as, I think we need to do more for women, actually. I'm a pro-life, but I think right now as a society that if you become pregnant as a teenager, you're kind of forced to have an abortion. I want to make sure that women are able to complete their education on time and still succeed in careers and get promoted if they were actually if they were actually pregnant. And also, my friend Mr. Beyer voted against efforts for states to stop human sex trafficking. And who were the victims of human sex trafficking? It's not really normally men, it's women, and it's young women who are children. And we need to do more for women. And women are 50% of the population. They should not be treated as minorities.
Mr. O, the national deficit is now $21 trillion, the highest ever in history. And yesterday, Senator Mitch McConnell said we have to cut Social Security and Medicare. What is your opinion?
That is my #1 priority. It's like if you pick up my pamphlet, it's already on there. It's an issue. We're basically 10 times our annual tax revenue in debt right now, and that's a huge issue. My generation, your grandchildren, we're going to have to, worst case, we have a Soviet Union collapse, and that's an issue that we need to address. And Mr. Beyer, he had 4 years to tackle the debt, and he hasn't done anything about it. For example, he voted nay against the Spending Cuts to Expired Unnecessary Programs Act just recently in the last year. So what does that say about the debt and our future? He also actually took a lot of money from Lockheed Martin and actually approved the $1.3 trillion F-35 program, which might not be necessary. We're already at almost $22 trillion in debt, and he agreed to do that. Why? Because he was bought by Lockheed Martin. It's a huge issue, and the jobs are not really here in Lockheed Martin. They're building elsewhere across the country and overseas as well. We have to look at what's really going on. Also, with the debt, I want to address the debt by actually introducing a bill. I want to bring solutions. I want to incentivize federal programs, everyone on federal contractors, civilians, to actually be paid a bonus when they turn in excess money. It changes the climate, changes culture, people get rewarded, people have more money in their paychecks, and we're reducing the debt and actually spending money appropriately.
There's so many misstatements in the last 90 seconds, I don't know where to start, but let me just say clearly, I strongly believe that women need to make their own decisions about their reproductive rights. I don't believe any American teenagers are being forced to have abortions. And by the way, the federal government doesn't fund any abortions. Let me also say on the sex trafficking bill, this was a bill opposed by the Trump Department of Justice as unconstitutional, by the ACLU, by all the survivors of trafficking and the largest network of anti-trafficking services. What we're trying to do is protect the women who are in this industry from pimps. And what we've seen is, now that the bill has gone through, there's been this huge increase in pimps in the major American cities. This was a fundamentally anti-woman bill, but it's easy to demagogue on. On the budget, I have been a budget hawk my entire adult life. I'm a car dealer, my goodness. And I've never in my 4 years voted for a budget that made the deficit worse. I've always voted against the Republican budgets that keep pushing it up. I voted very strongly against the $1.7 trillion tax cut for the richest corporations in the world, which is the single largest legislative deficit in history. I strongly support the Social Security 2100 bill, which will make Social Security valid. And dealing with Medicare and Medicaid, which is the original question, is really hard. Because what we do not want to do is the Paul Ryan plan, which is put seniors on a voucher and put an absolute cap per person for Medicaid. Because what that's going to do is cut Medicaid for all.
Mr. Beyer, do you support common sense gun control measures? If so, what measures would you support?
I very much support gun. We're losing 33,000 Americans per year to gun violence. And one of the saddest parts, that Thomas seems to assume that serving in Congress, I get to have my way every day. This is not true, especially in the minority. And it's been sad that we've not been allowed to have one single vote on any gun measure in the U.S. House in the 4 years that I've been there. The NRA owns the Republican Party. If Thomas gets elected and isn't owned by the NRA, he will be the one exception in the Republican Party there. So all the common sense things that I think almost every NRA member agrees with, that we should have universal background checks, that we should limit ammunition, that we should limit the ability of the fast-firing things, that we should ban terrorists, people that are on the no-fly list from buying guns. My specific lead bill the last 2 years has been the red flag bill, to give any of us in the room the ability to petition the courts to put a family member on the background check list if they're in a psychiatric crisis, deep depression or psychosis. This is a bill that's passed California and Texas. We need to have it on a national level. It's something that could have prevented Virginia Tech, show that everyone knew was a paranoid schizophrenic, but was able to buy guns legally to kill those 30-plus kids. So I will continue to be the strongest advocate I can for reducing gun violence in America, and I will continue to stand up for the NRA.
In regards to the Human Sex Trafficking Act, it was Mr. Beyer, I think he was only 1 out of 20 or 17 people that voted against it. Just please do your research. Don't believe me, don't believe Mr. Beyer. Everyone just do their research before they vote. But that actually shows how partisan Mr. Beyer is. And there's nothing wrong with being a Democrat, but when there's a big positive bill just like that, you had to look past party lines. And I've done that. Prime example, I'm a gun sense candidate by Moms Demand Action as a Republican. That's a surprise. And if you go to the NRA site, and no one owns me, but the only people that really own me are individual citizens right here because I'm working for you. If you look at my NRA rating, it has a bunch of question marks because the NRA said, hey, you became a gun sense candidate, but you actually filled out a survey pretty well. And I said, well, that's the most swampiest thing that you can ever do to me. And he's like, well, anyone that's a gun sense candidate, we give them Fs no matter what, even if you mentioned everything, you checked everything on the block. My sense to guns is, I'm an Army veteran, Army Airborne Ranger, infantry officer, and Mr. Byers can disagree with this, but I say that guns don't kill people, people kill people. So you have to look at the individual and what you can do. And as far as school safety, teachers shouldn't have guns unless they're an ex-cop or undercover police officer. But we need to actually protect schools. If you're an active shooter, would you try to go to the Pentagon? No, right? You want to make sure all these soft targets are hard targets. Also, I believe criminal background checks, that already exist. We need to make sure that guns actually are in the hands of law-abiding citizens so they can protect themselves.
Mr. O, do you support work requirements for SNAP recipients? And SNAP is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program.
If they are 100% able to work and there is work for them, then yes, I believe that everyone should do their part. Even a Democrat, JFK, who would probably be a Republican, said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. And as far as entitlements, Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid, I want to make sure that people who are actually fully disabled, whether you're blind, you're unable to work, or you're mentally disabled, that you're receiving the maximum amount of benefits possible. Right now, I feel like there's people who are taking advantage of the system, and that creates an unfortunate for people who truly, truly need it. And that's what Republicans want. We want to help people, and we want to make sure that nobody is abusing the system because we want equality for all. We want fairness. And that's what my goal is, to make sure that people aren't taking advantage of the less fortunate who really, really need it. I actually did a tour around service stores for a disabled community organization, and they told me that only 60% of costs are covered under Medicaid. Why? Because there are people who are using it when they don't really need it. And I want to make sure that people who really, really do need it receive all the entitlements that they can possibly have. Also, Mr. Beyer, he actually ignored ADAPT Virginia and DC 9 times, if you actually look at it, against the Disability Integration Act. So I'm here to be a representation for the disabled community.
On the work requirements, I think we have to be very careful. The thoughtful people who look deeply into it assume that, I think, conclude that only about 10% of the people, less than 10%, I've seen the numbers as low as 6% of the people that are getting SNAP benefits are able to work and could and should be working. And so if we can craft that carefully enough, then yes, let's do it. But we have to be incredibly aware of the unintended consequences, which are that many of these so-called able-bodied people are taking full-time care of children. They're taking and by the way, working for $7.20 an hour, you can't pay for child care. Or they're taking care of elderly parents. We have a memory care problem in this country, which is enormous. Any one of us here who's tried to pay for the care for their parents realize how quickly you run out of money. Or they're in a community, it's like Southwest Virginia, where there are no jobs. Or where the job is an hour away and they don't have a car. Or where the job is $7.20 an hour. And you're working less than 30 hours a week, so you have no benefits, no sick days, no holidays, no anything else. So the work thing is, again, one of those easy to demagogue issues, but somehow assumes that Americans want to be on food stamps, that they want to go take advantage of the system. There's a great new essay by Isabel Sawhill on the Americans left behind, and the number one thing that they want is to be independent and self-sufficient and be full of self-respect. No one wants to be on SNAP.
Mr. Beyer, what concrete steps will you take to address the immigration crisis in the United States?
The very first thing that I will argue for is to take care of the dreamers. We have, depending on the number, everyone possible is about 1.5 million. The ones that are actually signed up, I think the latest number I heard was 690,000. There are an awful lot in Northern Virginia, a bunch, I think more than 400 at George Mason University, a bunch at Northern Virginia Community College. These are kids who speak English as accent-free as you or I. They were raised here, but disadvantaged of being brought here by their parents when they're 1-year-old or 5-year-old. They're as American as my kids or your kids. And it will be a tragedy if we fail to act on dreamers and we let Donald Trump and Stephen Miller deport many of them. The second thing will be is to address those that are here on temporary protective status, the TPS workers, Nicaragua and Haiti, or El Salvador and Haiti. I have a bunch that work for us in the family business. They've been there 10, 12, 15 years with American spouses and American kids. But largely, we have to realize that the American birth rate is the lowest it's been in 40 years, that we are not going to have a growing economy and a growing country unless we figure out where the new Americans are going to come from. And as Thomas is an example, our new Americans are the ones who tend to have the most energy, the most entrepreneurial spirit, are proudest of being citizens and have very high voting rates because they're eager to be part of our democracy. So I am a very pro-immigrant leader and intend to finally get immigration reform done if we have a chance to lead in the House.
While I'm out front, I don't want to beat the dead horse. I support DACA. But I want to touch one thing about immigration. I believe this is a deceptive tool that's being used. When you talk about immigration and all these politicians who talk about immigration, none of them really come from a recent immigrant background. They're not a second generation really. And it comes down to three categories of immigrants. There's people who know the system and they know there's paperwork to be filed and they file it properly and they immigrate properly. There's people who honestly don't know what, that there might even be a USCIS, maybe there's a language barrier, but if you give them paperwork and ask and help them and have a translator, they'll gladly do it. My family moved here, immigrated to the United States to seek liberty, opportunity, and freedom, and I want to make sure that same opportunities I was blessed with continues for everybody. And there's a third small group that people that is being leveraged is, like the drug cartels, people who are actually abusing the system. But from an immigrant standpoint, and this is where people are divided, it's the same thing on college loans, is actually, it's about rule of law. If anyone here marries foreign national, you have to pay tons of money for a green card, you have to wait, you're getting travel restrictions. So for all the people who came here properly, how is that fair? It's not fair. And it hurts our opportunities for the American dream. Also, I fully support legal immigration. I think we need to push out visas a lot faster, but when you have illegal immigrants, it actually hurts them too, because people are basically paying under the table. It's almost a slave market rate.
Mr. O, how will you work with your colleagues across the aisle to find common ground?
We've already did that by being a gun sense candidate by Moms Demand Action, because at the end of the day, I'm here to serve everyone. We don't have to agree on everything. We shouldn't. We're all individual citizens. God made us all as individuals, and we all have our own minds, and we like different colors, and we like different types of food. And that's one example. Another example I exemplified the reach across party lines is I've also aligned myself with Democracy Not for Sale. That's a Democrat group. And that's because I don't take any PAC money or corporate PAC money, because we need to make sure that politicians work for everyday individual citizens and governments are given back to the American people. Another third example, once again, I will reiterate that I am the only Republican that pledged alongside Activate Virginia. And I'm not afraid to do so. I encourage my fellow Republicans to do so, because at the end of the day, you look at things objectively. My opponent, he hasn't done that. He voted against the right to try acts if you have terminal illness, just because it was a Republican bill. He also, once again, voted against the Thin Blue Line Act, which protects our law enforcement officers if they're killed, and that's another example. I can go on and on about all the horrible bills that he has, just because it has a R next to it. And we need to look past that and do what's best for the American people at the end of the day. I will look at a bill and read it. I won't care if it has an R or a D. If I'm elected, I'll tell my staffer, don't even tell me. I don't even want to know, because I want to look at it objectively and do what's best for our district.
This is a very important part of politics for me. When I was lieutenant governor, I chaired something like 8 different commissions on child sexual assault, on infrastructure, on school buildings, the economic recovery plan in 1991. And in each case, I would find a leading Senate Republican to co-chair it with me. And we would staff the commissions with Democrats and Republicans. As a consequence, almost everything that we recommended passed. I've tried to do the same thing in Congress. Every bill that I've introduced, we has had either a lead Republican co-sponsor, or I have pled to have a lead Republican co-sponsor. Two notable failures. I couldn't get anybody to do the carbon tax with me, and I couldn't get anybody to do the Religious Freedom Act, which is a one-sentence bill that says no one will be denied admission to the United States on the basis of their religious beliefs. Actually, I had one Republican being retired. But one of the things that I have done very successfully, my suicide initiative is a bipartisan effort with John Katko, who is a Republican from Syracuse. My Tom Emmer, who's a Republican from Minnesota, and I put together a House Joint Resolution recognizing the role of women on corporate boards and women in C-suites. Bradley Byrne, a Republican from Mobile, and I are working at the Opportunity Task Force, trying to create more opportunities to lift people out of poverty. I have never once in my 4 years in Congress voted for or against a bill because it was a Republican bill. I opposed the right to try bill because over 100 specific disease groups like cerebral palsy, multiple sclerosis, et cetera, had opposed that bill as bad for them.
Mr. Beyer, what is your position on the government's current policy regarding the separation of children from their parents at our borders?
I think it will be one of the saddest things in American history, along with the Japanese internment or the sedition bills of World War I or the Dred Scott decision or Plessy versus Ferguson. We do a lot of things really wonderful in this country. This is not one of them. I have visited in the Maryland jails with the fathers who children were taken from them at the border. Not people caught in the desert in the middle of the night, but people who walked across the bridge at El Paso, surrendered themselves to customs officials, and one was jailed with his daughter for 5 days before she was taken away, other with his son in chains for 2 days before his son was taken away. I visited with the kids out in Manassas, in Oaksville, at Youth for Tomorrow, where they have 64 children who've been separated from their parents. And I've also been to the courts in Crystal City when the kids had a chance. I'm doing everything I can in Congress to fight this immoral policy. I did have a chance to, I just can't think of any other country that does this. I asked the Canadian ambassador if we moved to Canada, would they take our children away? He said, no, not at all. So we're going to push back as best we can.
Right up front, I don't believe that children should ever be separated from their parents unless the child's safety is at risk. For example, if the child is a victim of sexual assault by the parent, then that obviously deems that the children probably needs to not be with the parent. Other than that, that is something I agree 100% with Mr. Beyer on, and it's the right thing to do. And it is a dark moment in America's history. And the Japanese internment camp, that was actually a Democrat initiation. Trail of Tears. I know America, as great as we are, we have a sad history, and it's important that we learn from our past mistakes and make sure those mistakes don't continue. I just want to touch base on what Mr. Beyer said of passing bills. Does everyone know what a message bill is? A messaging bill is when before you run for office or you get reelected, you work with someone from the other side and say, hey, we need to get these bills across, be sponsored, so I can take this bill back and tell my constituents, hey, look, I just sponsored a bill. We passed this bill. But the thing about these message bills is that these bills never make it to the Senate. They're not meant to pass. So my question to Mr. Beyer is, out of 1,460 days, just about at the end of your term, how many bills have actually made it and been passed by you from all the way across to the Senate? And it really is, if it's not you don't vote based on R, why would you vote against the VA Accountability Act, which is a Republican bill, when we have 8% of veterans who are suffering with VA hospital? You also voted against the Whistleblower Protection Act for veterans. I can go on and on about these issues, but we need to look past it and do what's best.
Mr. O, what is your view of current funding levels for our military?
So the trick question is to it, I do want a strong national defense, but I honestly believe, if anyone here is serving in the military, raise your hand, you guys can probably vouch for me. Thank you. Thank you. Hey, everyone give a round of applause for our veterans. So I honestly believe the ballpark, I think if you do a 25% defense cut, I think we could have the same level of military and strength if we spend money wisely. And anyone who works in the federal government too, is the same story, is, hey, it comes the end of the fiscal year, we have all this money on our property books, so let's spend it, so we have our money next year. And that's an issue too. I think there's a lot of wasteful spending in the government, and Democrats will say, hey, Republicans want to cut spending. No, I want to make sure that your money, your hard-earned tax money, is spent wisely and not just spent for the sake of it, just so they can get a budget next year. That's why I wanted to bring my solution, where if you turn in excess money, everyone gets rewarded for that. And that way we don't need to keep raising taxes. I think there's a misconception of, we want programs and we want something positive, but we need more transparency and be accountable for what people are spending their money on. Just look at this. If we bought all these chairs on the government property books, you could probably go to Walmart and pay like $20 per chair. The federal government probably spent $200 per chair. Where is the accountability? And if anyone knows and ever worked in government property books, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I think the issue of defense spending is a very difficult one, but I don't think that we spend too much money. Right now, if you look at the total federal budget, 70 to 74% is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and interest on the debt. The remaining less than 30% is split between defense and everything else in the federal government, all the discretionary non-defense spending. So we're talking 12 to 15% of our total budget to spend on defense. I trust Jim Mattis, even though I just found out he was a Democrat this week. But he's one of the best Trump appointees, very smart Secretary of Defense. I look at the people before him, Leon Panetta and the many folks going all the way back. And they're trying to spend, it's difficult because these are huge bureaucracies and therefore there's got to be waste. But it's a whole lot easier to say get waste out of government than it is to actually do it. Thomas says he doesn't like the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter. Well, every analysis I've read is that this is essential for a rising China that's going to have the strongest military in the world compared to us. And if we don't have the F-35, we're going to be in deep trouble. But where I really see it is I visited the food bank down in Lorton and one morning to help hand out food, and half the people that were in there were military spouses with their kids because they are corporals and they're privates and they don't make enough money to feed themselves.
Mr. Beyer, how do you propose to address the crumbling infrastructure?
Well, thank you very much. I had a chance to serve on the Commonwealth Transportation Board in Virginia, which is our highway board, for 3.5 years when Jerry Blouse was governor, and have been a very strong proponent of our investment in infrastructure. We're falling behind. When I first started running 4 years ago, I hope Thomas doesn't blame this on me, but we were $3 trillion behind, according to the Society of American Engineers. Now, today, they say we're $4 trillion behind. 170,000 bridges, an electrical infrastructure which is fragile throughout the country, water reservoirs, so many different things that we need. We know that we live in an internet age, yet there's an enormous amount of America that has either no broadband service or very limited. And so one of the Democratic pledges, I mentioned this in my opening statement, is in 2019 to pass a $1 trillion infrastructure bill. That's $1 trillion out of the $4 trillion. It's not the whole thing. It will be a good start to start to rebuild our highways, our bridges, our ports, all the things that we need. The question, by the way, has always been, how do we pay for this? You know, Trump and Hillary Clinton both said they were going on an infrastructure bill. And Democrats and Republicans have not been able to get together on a new, credible long-term revenue source. If reelected, I hope to serve on the Ways and Means Committee because my central priority there will be, number one, carbon fee and dividend, number two, a stable infrastructure funding stream.
My solution is to actually, I would support federal funding to improve the infrastructure of the DC metro area. Normally as a Republican, people will say no, but the reason why I see it is the DC metro area is a very unique area. There's a lot of federal buildings, federal programs, federal infrastructure. So I see it no different from the federal government spending money to build a road onto a military installation or a sidewalk outside a government facility. So I would fully support federal money in Route 1. I also believe, improved infrastructure. First, we need to fix all these potholes. And once we start fixing potholes, then we can all relate that Mr. Beyer can make more money too and sell more cars, and everyone's gonna be happy, right? But in all seriousness, I like to have pedestrian bridges, especially in like very crowded areas, towards like Roslyn or Clarendon. You try to make a left turn and you can't make it because people are crossing, and you see it all the time in Old Town Alexandria. It's dangerous too because it's people's crowded streets and there are cars parked on both sides. I think we need to have a pedestrian bridge. Secondly, with the metro, it's really, really expensive. When I first moved here, actually the metro would cost me $380 alone without parking per month. I could just park from Kingstown and took Springfield Metro 4 stops over to Crystal City. I might as well just pay $150 more for parking. It would have been cheaper and faster. My solution to make the metro cheaper is actually allow private small businesses to open up shops in there, and actually creates more jobs. And actually, in regards to jobs, Mr. Beyer actually voted against protecting families and small businesses tax cuts. And Mr. Beyer's business is not a small family business.
Mr. O, what steps, if any, should the United States be taking to address the current crisis in Yemen?
So, I think I'm a big Teddy Roosevelt fan, and I think, speak softly and carry a big stick. The problem with Yemen is the way I see the same thing what happened in Afghanistan. We got involved, whether we should or we shouldn't have, people have disagreements. The problem is we're already in there. So we had to make sure we finish everything through. What happened with Vietnam, for example, we turned our backs on the South Vietnamese people who fought alongside United troops against communists. And turning our backs now will create an issue the same way. I think the same dilemma came with Trump's decision to pull from the Iran deal. You know, that's the same dilemma I have it. So my general philosophy, since we are in there and we should be committed and follow through until it's over and take it as a lesson learned. You can't just turn your backs and leave someone hanging at the end of the day.
My brother, my sister, my daughter, and my 4 nephews would all be surprised to know that we're not a family business. On Yemen, the first thing we should do is withdraw our support for the Saudi support what they're doing in Yemen. And this is before Khashoggi was murdered and dismembered in Istanbul last week. I've been writing and co-sponsoring both letters and pieces of legislation on the Hill for the last year. It is a humanitarian crisis. The number of civilians who are being killed by American weaponry run by Saudis is immoral and intolerable. By the way, we're doing all this because of fear of Iran expansion, because the Iranians somehow got allied with the Houthis, and they're winning there. But we need to find diplomatic, rather than military solutions. And then there's an awful article in the Washington Post this morning that said Americans basically funded assassination squads through, I think, the UAE to go into Yemen and assassinate Houthi leaders. This is, once again, not who we are as American people. American exceptionalism is not the assassination of foreign leaders and the like. So I very much believe that we need to stop doing that. But I think it begins with the fact that this is Saudi's reaction to Iranian encroachment throughout the Middle East and withdraw our support for the Saudi intervention in Yemen.
Mr. Beyer, should the public have access to the findings by the DOJ regarding Russian influence on U.S. elections?
Yes, and I very much hope that they will sooner rather than later. The more transparent everything can be, the better off I think all of us are. I spent a lot of time on the phone today with the Fairfax Commonwealth Attorney on the Bijan Gaysar case. Some of you may remember the young man who was shot to death by Park police. And one of the greatest challenges there is we don't know what the FBI investigation has come up with. And when there is this opacity, when everything is dark, you have no idea whether justice is being served. We had the same thing with John Gear in Fairfax a couple of years ago. I know we're talking now about things at the federal level, but I'm hoping that when the Mueller investigation is finally done, that everything that he has investigated and documents is open and available to the American public, whichever way it goes, whether it exonerates the president or condemns a bunch of other people. What we want to know is what the truth is.
I largely agree with Mr. Beyer. I would fully support an investigation. If there's something to, some evidence to be found, then let it be found. The American people deserve to know the truth. If there's nothing to hide, then there's nothing to worry about, right? So that's the way I look at it. If the American people demand transparency, I think we need to make sure we give them transparency. My question is, technically, Iran is our enemy, and I'm all about having a strong national defense. I served 8 years in the military. After being a supply guy, I became an infantry officer. Now working in Army Special Operations Reserve as PSYOPs. And actually, in my regards is why does Mr. Beyer have such strong support for Iran? He actually voted against strengthening oversight of Iran's access to Finance Act. That's the question that we need to know. Whether we should be in Yemen or not, I think the problem is I think military force should be the last option ever possible because human lives are at stake, and we don't want sons and daughters of Americans to not come home. It should be the last resort. But the thing is, once again, we're already committed, and we need to make sure we follow through with that. Thank you.
Mr. O, what specific measures would you support to eliminate dark money and reduce the influence of money in politics?
Guy campaign like me, just don't take any PAC money. It's not hard. Seriously, it's not hard. I am the only candidate that doesn't take PAC money. And that's it, bottom line up front. So my challenge to my friend Mr. Beyer is right now to turn all his money back. If he dumped all his PAC money, the millions of dollars he has, I know you have like almost $1 million, you can donate a little bit right now. to turn it all back. You can choose a charity. You can choose charity for wounded veterans. That way it's a good gesture for voting against the Accountability Act. Or you could do a charity that's pro-environment, climate change, or whatever it might be. But throw that money away. When you accept that money, it just darkens your sight and it clouds your vision and your judgment. And to me, I just don't understand. To me, it's corruption, but somehow it's legal corruption. In other countries, you're basically taking legal bribes. Politicians shouldn't be bought. I think there also needs to be limits too on how much how much candidates can have a cap on campaigning. I think that's an issue too, because right now elections are being bought no matter what. There's a lot of outside influence, and we also talk about Russia. I think Russia meddling. So where is this money coming from? So I think we definitely need oversight on where people are getting this money from, because you can have corporations, where people outside the United States put the money into the corporate PACs and then give it to politicians.
Mr. O asked about my vote on the Iran finance. The primary reason I voted against it because it was going to dramatically undercut the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which I think was the most important thing that Barack Obama got done in his 8 years to make the world a safer place. The Iran nuclear deal stopped their nuclear program, exported all their uranium, destroyed their heavy water reactor. It moved them from weeks or months away from nuclear weapons to years and years away. And we didn't want to do anything to unwind it. Unfortunately, President Trump has withdrawn it, but the rest of the world is still abiding by the agreement. It was a very dangerous thing to do. The corporate PAC money, this is a silly debate, but it is not dark money. You can go look right on the FEC report tonight and see everyone who's given every dollar to corporate PACs. Thomas likes to say that it is only the CEOs that are giving $2,700. In fact, no, in any of these corporate PACs, there are often thousands of individual employees doing it. And if you don't want to take that, then you shouldn't take Sierra Club money or AFL-CIO money or anything else. By the way, I am totally with him. If we can get comprehensive campaign finance reform, John Sarbanes, a Democrat from Maryland, has a wonderful set of bills. I'm for it, but I'm also against unilateral disarmament. We are seeing on the other side, again, hundreds of millions of dollars being spent. And campaigns are about message and message delivery. You have the best message in the world, but if you don't tell people about it, no one's going to know who you're going to vote for. And what we use money for in politics is to print the brochures, to have field efforts, to go on TV and radio, to fund, I'm not spending a lot of money this year. All the money I've raised, I've given out dollar for dollar to Democratic candidates around the country that we think can win on November 6th at $2,000 a clip. Not enough to affect anything. And to Thomas's point, I've been doing politics a long time, and I don't think anyone can point to any one vote or any group of votes I've ever made on the basis of who's given me. It's too little money to ever affect your morality in New York.
Mr. Beyer, what are your plans to address issues of affordable housing, particularly for the middle class that's being squeezed?
Affordable housing is, someone asked me the other day, what's the #1 issue in Northern Virginia? And I actually say, what I hear more than first of all, most Northern Virginians are focused on Washington, D.C. rather than Northern Virginia because we're so nationalized in our attentions and our interests. But affordable housing, we have 150,000 families waiting for affordable housing in the metropolitan D.C. area. It's an enormous challenge. Just in Arlington now, as Andrew, who lost 20,000 affordable housing units, fully fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund at the federal level, at the state level, and triple the number of housing vouchers, double the housing tax credit that builders get when they build affordable housing. The housing advocates in Arlington and Alexandria and Fairfax, and I've done a number of roundtables with all those leaders, tell me that those two steps at the federal level will largely solve the affordable housing problem over the years to come. By the way, with many other people, I've been deeply involved in the whole attraction of Amazon to Northern Virginia. Their #1 concern, obviously, is tech workers. The #2 concern is affordable housing.
I come from a working class family, so people talk about helping the poor, helping middle class Americans. There's nobody else in this room, no other candidate knows about being a working class American than myself. I guarantee it. I worked as a mover. I made $10 an hour. I made actually when I first enlisted, I made $1,280 as a private in the United States Army. So when you talk about working class Americans, that's me. Affordable housing, actually in Alexandria alone in the last decade, and I actually visited the Chase and Affordable Housing Society when I was campaigning, and they told me that affordable housing units in Alexandria, for example, decreased by 88% in the last decades. And the neighborhoods that are actually getting gentrified and where affordable housing units are decreasing, they're occupied by all Democrats. You want more affordable housing? Cut regulations. Put some Republicans in there. Stop cronyism. I want to talk about cronyism and taking money. My friend, Mr. Beyer, he's taken about $60,000 from the automobile industry. And conveniently, he's also able to expand his building permits, to expand his car dealerships, while housing gets more expensive every day. And one thing he actually did is he voted against a joint resolution regarding indirect auto lending and compliance with the Equal Opportunity Act. He's not here to serve you. I'm here to serve you. We gotta wake up and see what's happening. Housing is so expensive, rent gets higher every year, and that's why I decided to run.
Mr. O, do you think there are loopholes in our current tax code, and if so, what do you think they are, and what should be done to eliminate them?
I really wish I was a certified public accountant and a lawyer. But I think there's always loopholes, and we need to close the gaps in loopholes. And with the new tax system, I'm not too familiar. We won't know because it's new. But the Trump's tax cut actually creates jobs and helps the middle class more than anything. That 5% tax return you get, that's a lot for working class Americans. If you work paycheck to paycheck, 5% is a lot. And for rich 100 millionaires, billionaires, what are they get taxed? 20%, 30%, or even 80%? They're still going to be having their Ferraris, and they're not going to be able to relate. So Trump's tax plan works, and I could actually vouch for this. My friend, he works at Freddie Mac. He offered 8 job offers, and they still can't hire it. When you basically look at jobs on Indeed, when you see job posts that says 3 months old, those jobs are still in there. Before, during the Obama administration, when my friends couldn't find jobs, they were like, I can't find jobs even after like a week. The Trump's tax plan is working, it's creating jobs, and these are one of the things I agree with. There's things I disagree with Mr. Trump, and there's things I agree, but Trump's tax plan actually works, it brings revenue. And actually, when we talk about the loopholes, under the old tax plan, corporations were actually hiding money and withholding investments. Now, with the new tax plan, corporations are actually pouring money back into U.S., investing, growing the economy, and also at the same time, sadly, buying our politicians.
There are a number of loopholes that I very much object to. The number one is the carried interest loophole, which, interestingly, Hillary Clinton planned to close. Donald Trump planned to close it as a candidate, but that did not show up in the recent tax bill. This is where Warren Buffett famously says he has to pay 15%, but his secretary has to pay 33% on her income. I'm also very much opposed to the tax plan that Thomas just referenced. It cut corporate tax rates from 35% to 21%. Having worked overseas for 4 years, I would interact with more than 600 American corporations that had headquarters in Switzerland, and they all said 35 is among the highest stated tax rate in the world. But a quarter of American corporations pay 0 tax, and the effective tax rate before the cut was 13%. So cutting it to 21% means that corporations are paying ever smaller share of the tax burden. We've also discovered that, as we suggested, 83% plus of the tax cuts that we just did last year, which I voted against, have gone to the top 1%. And the biggest single use has been corporate stock buybacks, artificially elevating the price of stock by buying the stock back so that corporate CEOs can make more money on pay plans that are based on the stock value. There's a lot more that we can do, but overall we need to look and say, revenues, at this point largely driven by corporate revenues, are 15% of our GDP. That's his historic low.
Mr. Beyer, what is your position on the administration's proposed Space Force?
I am skeptical. I serve on the Space Subcommittee on the Science, Space, and Transportation. I really enjoy it. It's been fascinating to get deep into NASA and work on the Orion, the James Webb Space Telescope, and the like. However, I do respect the leadership at the Air Force, at the Army, at Navy, who all thinks the Space Force is a dumb idea. that we already have all these capabilities in the existing military right now. If we don't want to unnecessarily bloat, if we want to spend our defense dollars carefully, the last thing we need to do is create yet another institution, which, by the way, will give rise to an enormous amount of fighting as it tries to figure out who's responsible for what. So I think it's cute, but I think it's a bad public policy idea.
Kind of similar with Mr. Beyer. I think the moment people talk about Space Force, I saw people, especially in the military, on my army beds, like, I'm going to join the Space Force and just become a Starship Trooper or a big Star Wars fans. But in regards to the Space Force, the reason why I kind of agree with Mr. Beyer on making it a separate branch is essentially it costs more. And right now, we have separate branches, and each right now we're trying to reduce that. But for example, the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, they all use separate systems. They have separate federal contractors. They use separate network systems and separate nets, security infrastructures, and it costs a lot of money. You know, why can't we just all have the same thing? I don't remember actually. I wasn't born yet, but you know, the Air Force used to actually be part of the Army, and when you had that same uniform, but now you double the cost of the uniform. So when you have a lot of variety, it costs a lot more. Now, if the Space Force was fully integrated, we use the same data system, the same equipment, the same infrastructure, the same healthcare clinics, and the same platforms across the military, then it would be possibly cost efficient, but we're not there right now at this current state.
Mr. O, with the caveat that you're in the House and not the Senate, how would each of you have voted on Brett Kavanaugh?
So my take on with Brett Kavanaugh, I'd like to use an analogy. I don't have children. I'd like to have children someday. It's essentially, I don't believe either one of them, because it's a he says or she says, and it really depends on what would have happened. You know, had Dr. Ford been introduced and the allegation of sexual assault came immediately, then I would say, hey, halt. We need to investigate this completely, and we need to halt the nomination. However, alleged victim of sexual assault, and if she really was a victim of sexual assault, she was used as a tool and embarrassed. And that's wrong. I learned in criminology about victim advocation. If you're a victim of sexual assault, you need to be properly cared for, not be used as some political scheme or tool. That's very unfortunate what happened. Now, like I said, had the allegations came immediately, I would hold the nomination until the investigation was thorough. Now, because it came late in the game, I would have voted yes for Brett Kavanaugh. I think Brett Kavanaugh's family was also harassed ridiculously by the far left. For example, his daughter, the moment he got his nomination, was harassed while she was jogging. And that's ridiculous too. And Brett Kavanaugh, as far as react, he's not a politician. He doesn't put the fake smile and make the fake lies. I have full confidence that he will make judicious efforts and think objectively according to the Constitution.
When the president first nominated Brett Kavanaugh, I wanted to learn about him and hear about his opinions. I was very disappointed that the Republican Senate leadership decided to hold back tens of thousands of pages of documents that he had said he had printed over the years. I would almost certainly have voted no on Brett Kavanaugh. First, because I believe Christine Blasey Ford. And every person in my family believes Christine Blasey Ford. And virtually every woman I know believes Christine Blasey Ford. I also thought the way Brett Kavanaugh reacted in his response clearly showed he did not have the temperament to be an impartial judge. Then I thought the Supreme Court locker room cheering thing after he was sworn in was a very sad moment in American history. We've politicized the court. We have robbed the American people of the sense that the court really is wise men and women who are looking at these issues dispassionately. I wasn't thrilled with the fact that Brett Kavanaugh had been a political operative for the first 20 years in Washington until George W. Bush put him on the court. That's generally not the kind of judge you want, but willing to give him the benefit of the doubt until his testimony the day after Christine Blasey Ford. And so I definitely would have been a no. I hope he turns out to be a good judge. I'm not optimistic.
Mr. Beyer, what is your position on the U.S. withdrawal from the United Nations Human Rights Council?
George W. Bush withdrew us from the council before it had a different name. And then Barack Obama took us back in 2009. A dear friend of mine, Eileen Chamberlain Donahoe, was the first U.S. ambassador to the new Human Rights Council. And it was hard work. The council has a pretty bad tendency to pick on Israel almost all the time. Not that Israel is perfect, but Israel-Palestine totally dominates the Human Rights Council, which should be involved in the issues in 190 nations around the world. But I think it's very sad that Trump pulled us out. And unfortunately, it's what Trump is trying to do with the World Trade Organization, what Trump is doing with UNESCO, what Trump is doing with the United Nations, what Trump is trying to do to NATO and the EU. It's the destruction of these international institutions which we have built since World War II that help make the world a much safer place. A place where we have grown in wealth, in lifespan, in eradication of illnesses. And destroying the international trade system and destroying our participation in these international institutions, as imperfect as they are, is really bad public policy.
I disagree as very similar to Mr. Beyer on us pulling out, mainly because we always want to establish a relationship with all our countries, and we need to coexist in this world. As human beings, we all have a right, and we're to live freely, and it's very important that we have a method of communications. When you don't communicate, tensions rise and wars happen. But I think before anything, when we talk about human rights, we need to talk about what's happening right now in the United States. While I'm all for, once again, a strong national defense, there's issues going on. We don't have to talk about potholes, but we have people who can't afford housing here in our own district. We have issues, along the border, whatever it might be, what we call it. We have an opioid crisis. We have real problems here right now, not just for everyday Americans, but also for the less fortunate. So we need to focus and make sure that Americans are put first before we get involved in other areas. Why are we spending monies in other countries when our everyday citizens here, immigrants too, are suffering in the United States? I don't believe that isolation is a good policy. I think you should always have open to communication and have relationships, and also have a bond of understanding and cooperation between nations, especially when you're trying to talk about cooperation against terrorism and human rights efforts as well.
Mr. O, do you support House Bill 2472, the Disability Integration Act of 2017?
I believe I said that earlier, and yes, I do. I 100% support that act. And actually, once again, if you look at it, Coalition for Communities, I think I tweeted that and Add Virginia, it's logged that they approached Mr. Beyer 9 times in the last 2 years. That's a lack of constituent service, and that's something that I would fully support. And at the end of the day, even if I disagree completely, it's what the people of this district want. I'm here to serve what the citizens of 8th District need, and that's something that I felt like Mr. Beyer wasn't doing. Like I said, I learned in the military, your supporters don't work for you work for them. And I will make sure that everyone's voices are listened to. And I've done that, whether you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, Libertarian, whatever it might be. I want to make sure that your constituent services are properly handled. And I always say this all the time, but I want to make sure if I'm elected as a congressman, that I have 5 stars on Google reviews, 5 stars on Yelp, and 5 stars on Facebook, and that you like to actually come hang by my office and make sure that you're answered and your needs are addressed in a very timely and a professional manner, and that you will not be ignored because you have a disability.
I'm pretty sure Thomas isn't accused me of ignoring this disability community. I'm pretty sure. I have not co-sponsored the Disability Integration Act because it would bankrupt Medicare. And we have made that abundantly clear to my many, many friends in the disability community. The idea is good, it's just a bad bill. And we have not turned them away and not listened to them 9 times. 9 times rather, we've had the meetings that said, let's make this bill better so that I can co-sponsor it. I was a founding member of the Independent Center in Arlington in 1980. I founded the Disability Commission in Virginia. I led it the 8 years I was Lieutenant Governor, the Virginia Commission on Virginians with Disabilities. Every Lieutenant Governor since then has chaired that commission. I have an office full of disability awards. And I come from a family with many different members with different disabilities. This is something I've spent most of my adult life trying to serve Virginians with disabilities. But I want to make sure, as there's so many things we talk about tonight, on any given piece of public policy, there are complications. There are good parts, there are bad parts, there are unintended consequences, there are intended consequences. And the best political leaders, the best leaders, period, are ones who are wise enough to discern how the public policy is going to play out in the lives of real people and make votes and decisions based on that. In this particular case, this bill needs to be a lot better before I'll support it.
This concludes the question and answer portion of our forum. Could you give our candidates applause, please? And a special thanks to our crack team of timers here, our question bettors and takers, and of course to our two questioners here, Maggie and Annalise. The candidates will now have a 2-minute closing. Mr. Beyer will start, and then Mr. O.
Well, thank you very much for the great questions. Thanks for being here. Thanks for staying so late. I had hoped and still hope to get to the end of 5 years without saying an unkind word about my opponent. Thomas made it a little harder tonight, but I've been a car dealer and people have been yelling at me all my life, so it's been okay. I do encourage you, though, to correct the extraordinary amount of misinformation. Go to my website. Any of the bills that he recommended will have full explanations of why I chose what I think is the thoughtful, responsible, compassionate path on this very different votes. You know, America's at a very difficult time in its history. I don't think many of us are satisfied with the leadership we have at the very top. And my goal has been to try to find concrete things that serve history, that make a real difference in people's lives, whether it's suicide prevention or environmental. You know, I'm the leader on the Corridors Act to bring biodiversity to many species around the country, to fight climate change, to do criminal justice reform. We have 160,000 men over the age of 55 in prisons in America. Absolutely crazy. There are many, many different issues that I am working hard at. I do have a long list of things I actually have gotten passed, which you can also go on the website to do. But I'm going to continue to work as hard as I can, surrounded by some really bright, committed young people to make our Commonwealth and our country ever stronger. And I'm going to do it in as bipartisan a way as I possibly can. When my Republican pals won't let us vote on gun bills or things like that, then we try to turn them out of office. But with all those that are left, I'm going to work together with them mostly. Thank you very much for being part of this. And please vote for me on November 6th in 20 days.
I want to thank everyone for coming and listening, but just like Mr. Beyer said, please do your research. Please, don't take my word for it. Don't take from Mr. Beyer's. Look what's there. Think objectively. Look at the information. I'm asking for your vote on November 6th. My question is, how many doors has my opponent knocked? I've knocked on over 3,000 doors, and I can prove it. I can show you my shoe right here, and it has a hole in it. So, Mr. Beyer, I think I need a new shoe. And another thing is, I'm here to serve you at the end of the day, regardless what everyone's priorities might be. I think we all want something positive in the end. I think what's been tried hasn't worked. Obamacare or Affordable Care Act hasn't worked. We're still having issues with healthcare. Our roads and our infrastructure is tearing down. It's horrible. Our debt is spiraling out of control. And my opponent here had 4 years to do something about it, and nothing was done. We need to do better. And you probably see me out in the communities. I don't take it for granted. I'll never take it for granted. Once I became an officer and captain, I was still down there getting wet, dirty, getting muddy with my soldiers. So I'm there with the communities. You will probably see me. I'm thankful that Mr. Beyer, this was our 6th forum, but my opponent, he only showed up to 1 out of 6. That's an insult to democracy. He missed out for the charity forum for veterans. He missed out for the Black Chamber of Commerce, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Asian Chamber of Commerce, Multicultural Forum. I will never take this seat for granted. And I'd be honored to be your next congressman so I can serve you and do what's best for the American people. Vote for me on November 6th. I'm Thomas, though, and I'm running for United States Congress.